Welcome everyone, wherever you may be. We hope you're all doing well today, and thank you for joining us to our webinar where our experts will walk through how to get real-time and actionable visibility into your value streams. Now it is with great pleasure that I introduce today's speakers. First, I'd like to welcome Giorgio. He joins us as the Senior Value Stream Architect at Tasktop. Giorgio is a certified Scrum Master and skilled Agilist with extensive experience in helping companies optimize software development and delivery tools through the power of value stream management. I'd also like to welcome Ken. He is our Vice President of Scaled Agility here at Cprime. He was one of the first US minted SPCTs. Ken has over 25 years of experience in IT, as well as extensive experience as an executive enterprise coach and in helping enterprises with scaled agile transformations.
Outstanding. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We really want to talk about, from our outcomes of today, is having a common means or a common measuring scheme to look at the value within your value streams and how those measurements align to business results. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're going to talk about mechanisms for how to gather that information, how to define and organize your value streams, really to give you the visibility for what they look like. And then we're going to then talk about, with this measurement data and sort of a common taxonomy for how to look at the data and talk about the data, we're going to figure out how do you use that information to focus on where to improve your value streams and sort of turning that insight into action. And then lastly, we'll talk about some examples on those improvement implementations. And then more importantly, how do you then measure the results of those improvements? How do you know what impact you've had? So this is what we're going to talk through today. The flow, we'll first start off with an overview of the Tasktop flow framework that Giorgio will do. I'll talk about Cprime, how then we focus on using that data to help improve value stream performance. And then we'll both take you through a real live example where we'll actually see a value stream in motion and talk about some scenarios on how to improve that. Then finally, we'll talk about how you can continue to get more information and do a Q&A at the end. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
Giorgio, why don't you do the first part here?
Sure, no problem. So with Tasktop, what happened is that our CEO, Dr. Mick Kirsten, discovered that as we were working with customers, and we've been working with customers since 2007 in terms of integrating their platforms across their entire tool chain, what we discovered was that there was a lot of complexity in that process, but then the challenge that they were having was that their ability to try to gain that visibility, try to do adoption through whatever was agile or hybrid was failing. And the big problem was they weren't able to effectively align their work with business results and be able to do that across the multitude of different platforms that organizations use. And so that's where we discovered that we were kind of like uniquely qualified to be able to, provide that assessment for our customers in terms of, hey, where are we at in terms of where are we at right now with our work, and how do we connect into that work, and then how do we visualize that, and how do we measure that? And so that's where Dr. McKirsten spent quite a bit of time with a number of different of our clients over the years in different parts of the world to understand their processes and try to get an understanding of what's the best way of being able to align that work to business results, right? And so that's where we developed the flow framework. And basically the idea with the flow framework was that we wanted to be able to go in and say, hey, we want to be able to establish a way of looking in and seeing where the tools are being used and in what process, ideation, creation, the actual release of it, and then the maintenance operation of it. And then being able to take that information and being able to, if there's any type of activity with it, being able to establish define those value streams. And then once we have those value streams defined, being able to effectively measure it. And having that as being a common way of measuring that work as it aligns to business results. And so that's what that flow framework represents. And so with that, what we've done is say, okay, so first of all, we need to be able to, capture the information, of course, and be able to visualize, but we also have to provide that mentorship to be able to provide, understanding of saying, okay, here's the information and what does it represent? What is it telling you? And then being able to focus on the areas that you need to focus on to improve your flow, and then being able to take that value stream to be able to achieve against your business results, and being able to do this in a common way across the entire organization. Having that common language to be able to effectively assess how your product value streams are moving forward at whatever level that you're looking at. And then with that, of course, is that we wanted to be able to establish not only do we want to see and visualize that out information, but whether we need to see whether we see challenges when it relates to processes, because we can visualize, we can see where those challenges are, where those bottlenecks occurs to processes, but also from the aspect of, hey, we have processes here that could be more effective if we automated it. And so that's the other aspect of our solution, to say, okay, not can we only visualize and measure, but we also want to be able to go out there and say, here's areas where we can document and implement process improvements, but also here's other areas where we can automate that process and improve that as well for our organizations. And that's where we have Tasktop Viz, which provides that visualization, as well as Tasktop Hub that enables you to do synchronization, integration of information across your tool chain. And because we've had these many years of experiences, we've actually have developed something rather unique in the marketplace, the ability to go in and have a multitude of different connectors, over 60 of them, also being able to connect into other tools that organizations use, and be able to obtain information from that to align it to the connectors, the connections that they already have. They're syncing information together. So we're not only getting the synchronous of information, but we're also getting those other tools, maybe whether they're in-house tools or whether they're other tools that other teams are using on a one-off basis, and being able to gather information from those as well, and being able to test against this. Every day we do 500,000 tests to make sure, hey, we want to make sure that the connections are good and reliable, so that that it's basically working all the time for you. And then because we have that kind of reliability with the connections and obtaining that information, then we can visualize that with Tasktop Viz, which allows you to be able to measure those things that really matter to you, be able to assess and understand what product value streams are going to provide you growth and be able to protect your business, as well as avoiding those siloed optimizations that tend to happen, particularly in medium to larger organizations. And so that's something that our customers have been able to leverage, being able to see and visualize information and be able to measure that. So we're able to do that, but of course that's only part of that's what we focus on. But we also need expertise, and that's where Cprime provides invaluable expertise for our customers and others as well, of course, particularly in the process areas. And I'll let Ken talk about that now, of course.
Great. So if you go to the first slide in there.
Oh, sure.
So if you look at all that insight that we're gaining from Tasktop, it's going to point us to potential problem areas. Pulling all that data together from the various tools that are being used are going to highlight potential issues. Well, many times the metric itself does not directly inform what action you should take to improve the metric. And so what you often need to do then is see what the data is telling you and start to explore and start to understand how you can improve that value stream. So what Cprime does is we really take a very holistic view to all aspects that you need to ensure that a value stream is successful. Value stream essentially includes, the people, the information, everything that you need to make sure that flow of value is operating correctly. And so Cprime brings together many different methodologies, product mindset, agile, cloud technologies, to make sure that we're thinking about the problem space and the solution space, right? And we're iterating towards value. The next ring, when we talk about portfolio, collaboration, visibility, quality, DevOps, these are the technologies, the tools where Tasktop will be pulling data from to visualize it. But many times organizations need support in standing those tools up and leveraging them properly from a process perspective to make sure they're configured properly for them to actually get the value out of the system and to improve their overall flow. So Cprime can help, stand up, implement and help the usage pattern with those. And then if you look at all the different services we offer, from consulting through education, development, managed services. Again, all of these different things can come into play to possibly help improve your value stream. So no matter what the metrics are telling us from Tasktop, we're going to have the ability to dive into those areas, figure out the problem, help diagnose it, and recommend the corrective actions to go forward. So you go to the next slide. One of the ways that we really look to the approach we take to do this is what we call our Prime approach. This in and of itself, the way we operate with our clients is very iterative in nature. Prepare, roadmap, iterate, measure, enable. This is really about going through a journey together that starts with understanding context during prepare, coming up with an initial plan for where we're going to go in our roadmap based on the most pressing problems that came out of that analysis. And many times this is where the Tasktop metrics can start to inform where we are. Then with that backlog of challenges to go after, we start iterating through them. A series of experiments, gather feedback quickly, see the result of those experiments, and then move forward, measuring each step of the way. So you want to make sure that whatever action you're taking, you can have a hypothesis for what it was going to do and measure the impact of what it actually does. And then all throughout that, our goal is to enable you as an organization to become self-sufficient long-term, so that once you get your teams stood up, your internal coaches going, you can take ownership of your transformation long-term. But our job is to accelerate you towards that. So the next slide talks about how we help accelerate you towards that. And that's our Prime kit. So we've done dozens and dozens of transformations, both on the Agile side, SAFe, on the tooling side. So what we've done is we've created an asset library where we've packaged those assets up with templates and best practices and examples that you can instantly leverage no matter where you are in your transformation to improve where you are, to get started. So these are proven assets, proven techniques, proven artifacts that will help accelerate wherever you are in your transformation and help you get to those business results. So that's overall what Cprime does relative to Tasktop and how to improve your value streams. So with that, I think we're ready to head into our real life example of how to measure and improve value streams. So let's jump in.
So yeah, so this is actually Tasktop Viz that you see here. And we actually have, currently we have an organization, and their challenge is that they actually have some good structure built into their organization, that they have an ITIL structure, but then the work that they do is also from a SAFe framework perspective, and they need to be able to measure their product value streams from these different frameworks or from these different positions. And so with Tasktop Viz, we enable an organization to do that, to be able to define what their product value streams should represent, depending on your responsibility and roles within the organization, whether you're responsible as a release train engineer and managing your release train, or whether you're an executive and you need to see things from a higher level, where you need to be able to manage, let's say in an ITIL structure, your domain, or maybe you have a offering that you provide, and within that offering, you need to be able to manage it from that perspective. And so that's something that you're able to do. Now, how the information gets fed into this visualization is actually surprisingly a very straightforward process. Again, because we've had a tremendous amount of experience in this area in terms of integrating with platforms, and we're tool agnostic. So our job is to be able to connect with those platforms that an organization is using, and be able to do it in a straightforward read-only type of approach, right? Because we're just trying to obtain information, trying to understand where things are at this point in time. And so we're not trying to be obtrusive. We're not requiring organizations to make changes to their platforms. The idea here is to go in with a standard type of rights to be able to go in and grab that information, obtain that information, and then start using that information to provide this visualization on a real-time basis. And so that's the objective here. Now, of course, going back to here, we have an example here of where we have an offering, and then we have two business applications where we're looking at trying to, assess how things are progressing. And I'll go ahead and actually bring in Kent to talk a little bit more about what people are seeing here from this perspective.
Absolutely. Let's dive into one of those, maybe to the release train, so we can see the target business results that they're going for down in the unified monitoring, I believe. Let me just cover what you're looking at here, so people can get a sense of what this data means. So first of all, as we mentioned, ultimately our goal is to track business outcome, business results. So you can see at the bottom there's 4 categories of business results: value, cost, quality, and happiness. And so you're going to set targets in each one of those areas for what you're trying to achieve and how things are trending. So those are ultimately what we're going to be looking at. But then how do we start thinking about and informing why we're getting or not getting business results? We're going to look at our flow metrics, right? The flow metrics, first of all, are going to be based on the flow items that we mentioned earlier that you see up at the top. So features, defects, risks, and debt. That's the way that we're standardizing terminology. And so you're basically going to take all work that falls into one of those 4 categories and align it into those 4 categories within the tool, so that we can categorize all work in terms of one of those 4 buckets. And then what we do, once we have the work in those 4 buckets, we can start looking at how that work is flowing across that. So you have flow velocity, first of all. Flow velocity is basically a measure of how many of those items are being completed in a given time period. And you can, as you see right now, this view consolidates all 4 of those buckets together, but you could also filter the view to look at just feature data or just defect data if you only want to look at one of the flow item types, okay? We'll leave them all together just for the rest of the introduction here. Then you're going to look at flow distribution. The Scaled Agile framework talks about setting capacity allocations of how much of your capacity you're spending on different types of work. And so this is a way to very quickly be able to visualize how you're doing against those capacity allocations. Are you over-investing in any one area? So your distribution really shows you where you're spending your time and how much of each of those flow item types is being completed in a given time period. Thus, you can see if you're over or under investing. Flow load is an indication of how many of those flow items are in an active or a waiting state, meaning that work has started. It's really an indication of how much WIP do you have, right? And as we know in the Agile space, having too much WIP is going to affect flow and throughput, and it's going to make it much more difficult for you to achieve your outcomes. Flow time is basically the time from the start of the work to the completion of your work. So it's basically showing how long on average is it taking you to complete these flow items. So you're really seeing what that throughput is and how that's trending. And then lastly, an overall measure of the efficiency of your process is the flow efficiency. This is how much time that flow item is spent in an active state. So this is giving you a ratio of how much touch time on the work versus wait time. So you can really see how efficient is your process. That's the kind of information that we're going after when we do value stream mapping, for example. So those metrics really start to give us insight into what is actually happening within a value stream. So Giorgio, you want to tell us where this data actually comes from and how we map it in here?
Sure. So again, just really quick, defining your product value stream is something that you can do at basically any level. Whether it's from, if a team wants to be able to measure their flow metrics, then they can, and be able to do it in the same way that, let's say, other parts of the organization can. And so when you create that product value stream for yourself, first of all, you're going to go in and actually say, okay, what are the tools that we use to deliver our work, right? So we're going to go in there and use those tools, identify which projects, which areas of work that we're looking at, and be able to bring in that appropriate type of information. Now, and we'll do that automatically back up to 6 months. So you have that, you're going to, as soon as you configure the environment or configure the products, you're going to get information historically back so you can start assessing your flow metrics. Now, one of the items, of course, is that as this information comes in, then you need to start organizing it. And particularly from the aspect of how do you, one of the big things that people talk about, well, how do we normalize that information? How do we model this so that, we have, no matter how many, like particularly how many statuses that you might be using, let's say in Jira or in Azure DevOps or in other platforms, how do we go ahead and normalize those status flows? And so what we do is say, well, bring in those artifacts, right? And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to help you be able to model those statuses for you. So as soon as you bring that in, it just intelligently goes in there and says, okay, this is typically how this will align to, and we look at things from the aspect of things that are new, waiting, active, done, and canceled. And so we'll enable this for you so you can very quickly do this for your data. And then if there are items that are unique, in other words, something that we haven't seen too much before, then it will actually outline those out separately and say, okay, how do you want to align this? And then you'll be able to align it to one of these states. And so it's a very straightforward process in terms of getting that, being able to normalize that information. And then you can go in and align that work to one of the flow items. And basically, when you align it, you're looking for saying, well, does this artifact support, providing new business value? Or is this really dealing with quality? Or being able to understand, hey, we're trying to address security or governance compliance, and that's considered a risk. And here's some examples of something like that, as well as debt, being able to remove impediments from future delivery, which is something that typically is not something that people see a lot. It's quite surprising with every time we've deployed this, and we're sometimes surprised, and of course our customers are always surprised on how much work is related to debt that's not being paid attention to, and how it can really impact your ability to have effective flow. And one key thing to remember is that, again, these are the flow items. And so there will be times where you might have a user story that really is reflective of something addressing risk, that you have some user story, or maybe it's a Epic and Jira where the focus is that, hey, we have to improve our security and governance with this particular application. And so you will have cross-pollination of artifacts that support one of these for flow items. So again, it's something that you can go ahead and define in here. And so once you have done that, then it will go ahead and start calculating your flow metrics. And from that point on, it will keep, continuously updating, where you're at in terms of your flow on our Viz dashboard.
Very good. Yeah, so you can see you can really gain a lot of insight and understanding of where all your different data sources come from and how they map to one of those 4 categories. So even if these things are called something different in the various tools, you have the ability to sort of normalize across all those different terminologies and map them into one of those 4 flow items. So why don't we look into this a little bit, and maybe try to interpret some of what we're seeing here. So if first of all, I wanted to point out, because there was a question about what time box do these metrics align around, and I responded that it can really align around whatever time box you're looking to check the flow for. So you can make it a sprint, you can make it a month. In this case, Giorgio has it lined up to look at it at a program increment and safe, right, from a July to October, program
Right.
increment. So we can see what's happened to flow throughout that PI, basically. And if you look at that, as the PI's gone on, our flow velocity has started to go down for the feature work and the defect work. So something's happening. Many times you'll actually see the flow being lower at the beginning of a PI because you're just getting started, and starts to have a hockey stick at the end of going up. But in this case, we're seeing the opposite effect. We're actually going down. So let's look over at the flow distribution and see if we can get any insight as to why that might be happening. And if you look at our distribution, really how much time we're spending in each work item type, you can see that the amount of time we're spending on defects is growing throughout the PI. So this might suggest that we're getting a lot of production support defects in, way more than the capacity allocation we had set for defect work. So that's likely taking away from other work And depending on that defect work, it's actually slowing us down, some characteristics of that. Now, if you look at our flow efficiency, right, we've also, we saw a big drop in flow efficiency from August to September. Okay, so something's happening in our process that we're just not working as efficiently. So something's happening that we're going to want to, dig into and analyze, right? It could just be that one of the things I find sometimes with flow efficiency, so you can see earlier on when it was running at a much higher level of efficiency, that sometimes can be a false positive because you haven't modeled all the weight states properly and it's not actually rolling things together properly. So sometimes that can just be a correction. But in this case, the data suggests that maybe based on some of that additional time we're spending on defect work, that our overall efficiency is going down. And that also, if you look at flow time, the next one over, that is also starting to show some increases, that it's taking us longer because of the efficiency and the defect focus. It's taking us longer to get defects as well as debt addressed. So all of these metrics are pointing to, something could be awry in our process. So when we look at flow load, we also see that our WIP is going up in these areas. So let's see if we can figure out, are there some bottlenecks that we can dive into and help inform what might be happening here.
So what you're seeing right here is the way you interpret this is, I always like to call it the reverse magic quadrant, because the stuff that's happening in the right way is happening down here in this corner, and it's measuring by, how many artifacts are we working through of what types, and how quickly is it, flowing through our, what we call the state duration index. So if it's, so this is the area where things are performing well, then you can actually start focusing on some outliers. So I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about was, looking at it from a debt perspective, right, Ken?
Absolutely. So if you just filter that on debt, what you can see is that some of the debt items are getting done very quickly, as you see kind of clustered at the bottom left. But then over to the right, you see some outliers, right, where the duration's taking much longer. And so this could be an indication that we have a brittle architecture, and that some of our technical debt items are taking a long time to process, just because every time we touch those areas, we're really running into problems. So this might be an area where we really decide to work with the architects and understand and look at the overall application architecture and see, is there's some re-architecting that's needed here? Do we need to do some refactoring to try to remove these outliers? So that could be one possible action that you would take, to address that particular problem.
And then another type of particular problem that, particularly when dealing with defects, and we actually see this quite a bit when they start assessing defects, is, they'll see that some of it occurs pretty regularly, and but others, you start quickly understanding, oh, we've got some outlier incidents here. And this typically, what we've seen with many of our customers is that they have these other platforms of different parts of the organization, or have these different platforms that are capturing incidents. And like in this particular example, we had a ServiceNow environment, and so we have a lot of these tickets that are just in progress, but their duration index in this area is just quite a long time. And so you can literally just, if you wanted to, go directly to that particular asset in ServiceNow to get some details of what's going on, if you needed that level of detail of work. And what we see quite a few times is that there's a manual process that's occurring. And then in those types of situations, within the Viz platform, you have a means of being able to address that. So like in that particular example, the way we were able to address that is say, okay, let's apply some integration here. And so we went in and applied some integration to say, okay, we have teams that are using other platforms, and they're just not efficiently getting that information as quickly as they should. And so with this, in that particular case, what we did is say, okay, let's take their ServiceNow cloud and synchronize that information with the teams, with Jira. And actually, they actually had another team that was using, or other teams that were using another platform, Azure DevOps, at the same time. And so we very quickly established an integration. And here's an example of something like that occurring. So here, not quite exactly how they had it, but very similar. So we had, where they had incidents. And so now, instead of, this being like turn the chair and provide information, as soon as they went in and applied information about that incident, then it would just automatically flow into the Jira teams. And then of course they would be able to collaborate, work with the support teams, the customer support teams, and share documents and discussions and stuff like that. And it's a seamless process between the two. And so now, instead of having this lag in terms of their manual processes, we've automated that process for them. And then as you are able to take these process improvements, right, whether it's, as Ken was describing, or whether we're doing some automation, the important thing to be able to do is say, okay, now that we've done these process improvements, can we measure if they are effective to our product value stream? And so this is where you'll be able to apply that as a timeline event. And so you can go in and say, okay, this is when we've applied our integration. And then from that point on, we can start measuring, has that been effective for us? Or as we improve the processes between teams, or have we improved how we improved our processes in terms of adjusting our states? Has that improved our product, our flow metrics? And so that's something that you're able to do. As you discover these bottlenecks, you'll be able to go ahead and address them, and then be able to very effectively measure that moving forward.
Exactly. I really wanted to highlight that importance, that as you're taking these corrective measures, whether it be that the technical debt re-architecting or refactoring I mentioned, or let's say we decide to do a value stream analysis and change some of the structures of our teams or our release trains within that value stream. You really want to make sure that you can track the results of those experiments. So being able to set those timeline events and then seeing how they impact your flow metrics will allow you to have that cause and effect type analysis of what you've done. And Giorgio, you might want to quickly show, there was a question about how do I make sure I can really see the overall results on the overall impact on the business outcomes, the business results. So showing how you can then see, also changes in how those business results are trending, as we look at the details.
Yes. So if you here's an example where we're measuring FTEs, platform FTEs, and we wanted to be able to measure that and say, okay, from this particular milestone, as we go forward, how does that compare in achieving that particular business result as it relates to the work that we're doing within our product value stream? And so you'll be able, just as a quick notation about managing your product, your business results, that's something that you're able to go in and establish for yourself. And quick notation, this is something that you can define at multiple levels, multiple grouping structures within Tasktop Viz, because the business results you're trying to achieve may be at a higher level from, let's say, a senior position. You might have a different perspective, different measurements you're trying to obtain versus someone that's trying to understand, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve, our objectives as it relates to, working on this particular release train. So you'll be able to define those categories and utilize those categories at different levels or different, again, across a variety of different product value streams. So it's not necessarily something that is fixed at a high level and everybody follows. So you can, again, measure at your product value stream, but also at the same time, someone else can say, okay, we need to look at it from ascertain the flow metrics as it relates to our business results at that same level. So it really provides you a very wide level of flexibility in terms of capturing those business results and then being able to apply it to the product value streams that you need to be able to measure against.
So some key takeaways, you can't improve what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you can't see. So I hope we were able to show you that, you really need to make sure that you can pull the data from all the places where it lives today, normalize it into a common set of metrics and flow items to be able to look at, so you can really understand how it's performing. Having that common language that you're all talking, defects, debt, risk, etc. That common language and a common set of metrics is going to allow you all to communicate better and make sure you're talking about the same thing. But ultimately realize that the metrics are only going to point you to potential problems, right? You really need to make sure that you're not making it worse, right? Looking at the big picture, taking the right corrective action, and having the experience and understanding of the big picture to do that is critical. And then really making sure that whatever experiments you take, you can measure the impact of those in a very clear way, so that cause and effect is very clear, and you can see if that experiment was a success or a failure, so you can inspect and adapt from there. You want to add anything to that, Giorgio?
No, that's, well, outside of the fact that one of the most important things that we've seen, particularly from larger organizations, is the fact of having that common language, so that someone that is discussing their product value stream, it's going to be the same type of language that, same type of discussion that they can have with the senior level or with their teams, because everybody's using that common framework to be able to understand, okay, this is how things are progressing. So it tends to really, in a positive way, change the conversation that people have about, where they're at and where do they need to improve upon. And of course, you get that transparency because of that real-time data getting from your platforms.
Yeah.
I wanted to invite all of you to keep the conversation going with us. You can connect and reach out to Ken and Giorgio through LinkedIn, and also stay informed on our future webinars, read our blog, download white papers, case studies, and more in the resources section of our website. We've also linked another one of Ken's webinars on the art of value streams. And you can also reach out to us at learn@cprime.com with any questions or feedback, or if you want to start a conversation with us. And another easy way to stay update and follow more of our thought leadership is by following us on social media on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So as Ken mentioned, we did have a lot of great questions. Thanks to everyone who submitted your questions and for participating. We really appreciate the engagement. So the first question I'm going to pass over to you is coming from Rem, and they asked, how does this tool integrate with ALM or local?
How does that integrate with Jira, ALM, and other local apps is the question.
Well, we have, Tasktop has a number of connectors. Jira is one of them. And it's a pretty extensive connector. So we can basically connect, whether it's an older version of Jira, a newer version of Jira, Jira Cloud, Jira On-Site, multiple instances. We actually see that a fair number of times where an organization has multiple instances of Jira, and we're just able to, effectively connect into those and bring in the appropriate information, which, probably one of the biggest things, of course, is, you have a lot of flexibility with Jira and its ability to have different statuses for different teams, different situations. And so we're picking that information all up. And because we have a model approach, and you saw that in the SMART model, we are able to go in there and just say, okay, these are the different statuses. So let's normalize that information into the Viz so we can have a common way of being able to measure.
I'm going to ask that follow-on question that came from Ram. The business results and outcomes that are captured there that we showed, are those entered directly into Viz, or are those also extracted and pulled over from Jira in some way?
At this time, they are manually inputted into the application at this time, and I shall smile about that. So
a little foreshadowing there.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something that we have a fair number of customers now, and that's one of the areas that there'll be a change shortly, that we'll be able to snag that information to certain OKR platforms, etc., or if they're captured as quote unquote a strategic theme in some systems, or as a unique artifact in Jira. That's another thing that is actually pretty nice. Actually makes my job very fun, is the fact that it doesn't matter what kind of artifact Jira creates, custom artifact, we see it, we see the information tied to it, and then we can take that information and bring it in into an environment. And then pretty soon, as I mentioned, if you're capturing it there as a unique artifact, down the road shortly, you'll see that as if you're doing that, you'll be able to put that as a business result in that area.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thank you, Giorgio. We also had a really good question coming in from Michael, and he asked, where do you start measuring? For example, Is it at the ideation stage, requirements, or design? And how has Viz helped you identify blockages at the start of the journey, especially if the business is taking forever to agree on scope?
Did you hear the first part of that? Where do you start measuring at the ideation stage, requirements, or design, right? I'll answer that from a process perspective, and then you can answer anything from the tool. So I think, the goal is to measure through that whole process, because we want to make sure we don't spend too much time in the ideation stage before we get down into, actually delivering value. So we want to track it from, the full life cycle of that work, all the way from ideation. Now, granted, your flow characteristics early on in a project may look different once you get a solid backlog going, but the goal is to measure that, throughout, to start to identify blockages and how to get flow going as quickly as possible. Anything to add to that, Giorgio?
No, I totally agree. We actually encourage that, when people deploy the platform, we encourage to try to get it at the very beginning. When does this all begin, so we can have that complete measurement of your value stream from ideation to the point of delivery and that initial utilization of that product.
Great, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Giorgio. We also had an additional question coming in from Miko, and he asked if you help organizations do value stream mapping. Do you also help with process visibility, linking silos, since value stream usually takes several functions, and help improve underlying data sources?
Absolutely, that's squarely what Cprime does. We really help, dive into those value streams, analyze them, map them out, find out, using the metrics to point to problem areas, and then ultimately figure out how to resolve and fix them, including the various data sources. So yeah, that fall squarely into exactly what Cprime does.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ken. So I also wanted to ask if there were specific resources or places that both of you would like to send our attendees to. A lot of times we have questions on kind of where people can go to kind of continue their learning journey.
Sure. So, we put a couple links there in the on the previous slide, very specifically around value stream identification and understanding the value stream. There's a webinar there, but our website and the resources page has many more assets as well, case studies and what have you. So I would definitely encourage you to look there.
From our perspective, I'd definitely encourage you to go to the Tasktop website. There's a whole resources section on this, and in particular, if I have a bias, I really like our YouTube channel. You'll find a number of different discussions there related to value stream management and impacts, and do it from different perspectives, particularly, if you're doing it from a safe perspective, or if you're looking for process improvement. So there's a number of different videos in there that you can review that can help you out. And then, of course, our resources section is actually quite extensive in this area.
Okay, great. Thank you to you both. I think we're going to have time for one more question. I'll just squeeze it in. But basically, we had a question come through and they said, I see that this example was oriented to sprints and PIs. Is this also suitable for waterfall organizations using some Agile?
Hybrid, yes, absolutely. So just, again, the idea here is that what we're trying to do is say, okay, what are the tools that an organization are using? And agnostic to if it's a safe framework, it's agile, is it hybrid, is it waterfall, all of that represents, work that you're trying to get accomplished. And so we're going to go in there and grab that information. And then you can measure that, whether it's, by sprint basis, or whether it's more from a timeline, month by month, week by week. That's something that you can actually define in the environment for yourselves, of course, and capture that information, and then start assessing it. So yeah, we're totally agnostic about that. That's actually one of the nice pleasures for us, is that that we're able to connect into systems, and our job is to help you define your value streams and understand where you're at with it, and then enable you to see that information, and then be able to effectively manage that, effectively understand where your bottlenecks are, and be able to apply the right process improvements to it to improve that value stream. And of course, seeing how that aligns to the business results. It's just on a personal basis. This has been something that has been a challenge to be able to see for many of my customers over the years. And needless to say, being able to do this pretty quickly is something that's pretty fun to watch when we're working with our clients. Typically, you're going to get data back within the first time you get in. You'll start being able to get measurable results within 10 days. 10 to 12 days is typically what we see for our customers in terms of getting that little bit of history and understanding, okay, so this is how things are progressing, then start being able to apply process improvements.
Absolutely. And depending on which, if you are in a hybrid environment, again, taking the right corrective action is key. So understanding the characteristics of the process you're using, how it affects the value flow of the different item types, so the actions may be different for how you react to the data in a waterfall versus an agile environment, but you'll have the same insights either way.
Okay, great. Thank you to you both. And then I'm going to just throw in one more question since we have a few minutes left. Michael asked, can you give examples of an end-to-end business value stream? For example, what are the components?
So an end-to-end business value stream, SAFE uses the term operational value stream. It's really a value stream that touches the end customer. Right. We're generally focused in our industry on the people that are building the systems that the business value stream uses. But let's say, you're a bank and you offer loans out to the market, right? So your business value stream is when a person needing a loan comes up to one of your branches or applies online and says, I need a loan, all the way through when that loan is issued and repaid with interest. Right. And if you think about the steps along the way of them filling out that loan application, maybe they talk to a loan officer, they're given loan terms, they agree to the terms, they sign up for the loan, underwriting, all of those processes, those are all leveraging underlying systems to support those processes. And so what we're really tracking at the end of the day is how is work flowing through the development of those systems that are supporting that business value stream. So in order to, from a process perspective and from a team organization perspective, you need to understand that business value stream so that you can properly organize the people beneath that support it to make sure that the value that business value stream is looking, those business outcomes is flowing on a regular basis. So if you're trying to improve your loan close ratio by 20%, well, what are the key features you're going to implement to help improve that? That's really what we mean by a business value stream and how this tool and this process can help you improve the performance of it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ken. So I think that's all the time we have. So I just want to wrap up here. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Giorgio, for sharing your expertise with everyone today, along with the great real-life examples that we can all walk away with. We'd also love to thank our audience for taking time out of your busy days to join us, and we really hope that you got value out of this discussion. We hope to see you all again and have a great rest of your day.